It's really, really great to be back with this wonderful group. Saw many of you just a few months ago in Coronado, and excited to be in Rochester now that the rain is going away and things are clearing up. So I am joined today, Kiana Connor. I'm a managing director at Deloitte in our human capital practice, and I focus on organizational, workforce, and IT transformations. So very similar to all of the things that you're talking about here today. And I'm joined by my colleague, Glenn.
So Glenn Davidson, I'm what we call a human capitalist within Deloitte, whatever that means, but they call me a specialist executive, which largely, I'm just going to put it out there, means I'm too old to be a managing director. So I'm at the twilight of my career, and you're in the rising star of your career, right?
Trust me, that star is still going pretty high, ladies and gentlemen.
Anyway.
And go ahead.
No, please.
Glenn has purview of all of state, local higher education, so he crisscrosses the country quite frequently, and you'll likely see him in a home state near you very soon.
A home state.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're here today to talk about digital government and the future of HR. And so we know digital is probably top of mind for a number of your states, and while you're talking about it a lot, we'd like to start to get you to think about doing it. Glenn?
Yep, thank you. So a couple of questions for you. I'd really, whether it be a show of hands or just a yay or nay, how satisfied are you with your human resources function within state government today? Anybody? Okay.
I got a cheer over here from this table. Maybe not.
All right. Janelle, would you care to share your thoughts about this?
Sure. Well, my team knows, and I think many of you all know, we have a lot of work to do. And we are implementing a human capital management system now, so we're excited about the opportunity. But I think one of the challenges that we've struggled with is the planning part. So I don't know that we were as intentional and as thoughtful as we could have and should have been as we were thinking about what the future of work could look like. And then you add COVID, and the fact that that has, I think, changed how we perceive what work could and should be. And then you add to that the fact that our procurement was done 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So we have a solution that we purchased 2 years ago that we're now currently implementing. And then lastly, we have colleagues who have a very different view of what human resources or human relations or personnel, whatever you want to call it, should and could be. And so you add all that up, and I don't know that we're going to implement the best system for the future of hiring.
Got it. Thank you. Amy, any thoughts you'd like to share?
I think we have a ways to go. We're kind of right in the middle of our journey, I think. We are trying to make some transformational moves in our personnel, but we're kind of midstream on that.
Okay. So I asked the question because how did you feel pre-pandemic versus pandemic, right? Did you find it better? Did you find it worse over a period of time? Did you find it unable to respond effectively in a manner? So the reason I ask these questions it's not unusual. The pandemic really shone a really clear light on the issues associated with HR. And I've been in this business, what you don't know about me is I've been both a Virginia State like Kiana, I've also been a Fed, having only 3 years ago left the US Department of Commerce, where we did HR transformation. And the reason I share this with you is because really, over a period of 30 years, we've seen this incredible underinvestment in people, process, and technology related to HR, and you wonder why. Well, the reason being is when you look at a state budget, elected officials and looking at state budgets, what's the largest part of your state budget? It's personnel, right? And then they go, okay, so if we're looking to reduce the size of government and/or reduce the cost of government, we're going to look at personnel. And we're also going to look at the HR function as well, right? And candidly, oftentimes, no offense to people, but HR often reports to finance as opposed to necessarily directly into the government or to the administrative officer, right? So, you're reporting to somebody that has the purse strings and is trying to find ways to meet the budget requirements of the governor or whoever else, or the legislature. So what's happened, and this is really unusual, it has really increased the divide between what I would consider what commercial HR can do and what government HR can do, right? 30 years of neglect, right? And that's where we are today. What I'm really happy to say is that we have an opportunity to really just leapfrog, right? Forget about those last 30 years and then let's look at the future. And so if we can, so to this slide, let's look at these disrupting factors, right, that are really changing the way that we actually work with our employees. Let's look at the transformative technologies. Yes, ERPs have been around for a long time. They're probably, candidly, just an older technology. There's still obviously new work that can be done. I know you just spoke with Oracle, and there's Workday and other technologies that are actually been improved over a period of time. But the transformative technologies that we're talking about are these individual tools that exist. That you've heard about, whether it be ServiceNow or Salesforce or whatever, that can ultimately change an employee experience. There also, let's talk about robotics process automation, which we're seeing a greater amount of, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and cognitive reasoning, right? All kind of done digitally. It's just changed. It's been a game changer in the commercial world, and we're just now beginning to see the introduction of it into government. Let's also look at, the employee and citizen expectations. The employee expectations have really changed, and how did that change over a period of time? Well, then, first of all, look at those of us who were baby boomers or even X generation probably really were interested in building a career, right? Having a 20 to 30 year career and having a pension and having really good health care for life, right? It's not happening anymore, right? Millennials and youngers just really don't care as much about that long-term career and the benefits that inure from it. And that also changed with Obamacare, candidly. When you're able to get affordable health care for the reasons, then you're not necessarily feel bound to work in government to receive those benefits. So it's kind of changed. I mean, generational changes as it relates to attracting and retaining employees. But more importantly, what did the pandemic do? The pandemic has really caused a revolt. If you haven't seen it, there's and I'll send it to folks at the end of it, there's an opinion piece that a really respected MIT futurist put out today, or maybe, today in the Washington Post, that largely says, if you think employees are returning to work, get over it. Right? And that's just, you may require them for a period of time to come. But that's going to change, because we're already seeing it even within Deloitte, that people are not going to return to the office under any circumstances, and they've moved, right? I can't tell you how many people, our colleagues, younger colleagues, who said, well, if I'm going to be doing this from home, why am I living in Arlington, Virginia, for instance? I'm moving to Boise, Idaho, and I'm going to go skiing, from like 3 o'clock in the afternoon when you guys all shut down until the end of the day, right? And just have some fun doing it. Or move to Hawaii, and I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do my job, but the rest of the day I'm going to spend on the beach. So things have really changed. And then there's the Great Resignation, right? We've all heard about that. Candidly, it's a lot of people like me who have said, I've got my years, I don't really need to work any longer. I liked working, but I'm just not going to come back into the office. But you're seeing many more people saying, I'm not going to come back into the office at all. So I'm going to look for new work. And then, look at how competitive the environment has been for employment. We're seeing it. I mean, it's just the supply is not meeting the demand. I'm happy to say, yes, unemployment rates are still relatively high, but that's beginning to change dramatically. So we have to be prepared for all of these disrupting factors. And then finally, I'm going to just talk about this increasing focus on customer service. We're seeing that universally in every single department, right? Like, what can we do for our employees to get our employees to be much more customer focused and say yes as opposed to no when citizens are coming forward. And finally, the last thing I'll say is as it relates to employment trends, we're seeing more gig workers. We're seeing more contract employees. The bottom line is that people would like to have much greater flexibility in their lives, and they would like largely to work for themselves and then take on project work. And so, it's these various trends that are ultimately really incredibly disruptive for us. as we try to actually do the mission work of state government with the employees that we have. So with that, Kiana, I'll take it to you. Oh, well, and I think lastly, really the last thing I want to say is that a lot of us focus on, in HR, have always focused on talent acquisition and talent management. What we've not focused on is talent enablement. And talent enablement is not just about learning, for instance, and learning skills or competencies and the skills associated with that. It's also the technology and the tool enablement as well. So with that, I think that's a good lead-in for you, ma'am.
I mean, just the high level view of what we're facing, right? Challenges from an HR perspective. And that customer service piece is really important because as we start to think about how operations and how delivery is done within agencies, whether that's your agency, whether that's Department of Health, whether that's DMV, that is requiring us all to look at our workforce differently, the skill sets that we need in that workforce, how we interact with our clients, how we interact with our customers, how we interact with each other. So there's bringing together what HR is seeing as well as the mission across the enterprise. And so what Glenn want to talk about today, if I can get my mic to stay level here, is elevating HR and doing that through digital transformation. Our goal is to bring HR back to the core of the conversation after it's been on the side for 30 years, right? Because we do believe that human resources, that human approach, making sure that your employees are able to grow and to thrive in that workforce and having the tools necessary to do so. So what's digital transformation? It's a fundamental shift, right? It is a change at a very large scale. It's reimagining your existing delivery models and your service delivery models, and it's enabled by technology. Raise your hand if any of you own CDs. Now this is, come on, how many of you have CDs? How many of you still use your CDs? What are you using instead of your CDs? How are you taking in your music these days? Pandora. So what happened to the music industry? It was a digital transformation. We went from CDs to Spotify, right? HR is going to be the same. All of our operations are undergoing this massive shift. And somehow we're leaving the most critical part behind, and that's our people, right? So what we want to do is to start to think about how you can elevate that human experience and that employee experience. So what is digital transformation and what is it not? To get us started, I want to make sure that we understand how closely aligned digital transformation and IT modernization is. You really can't do digital without IT modernization. Studies have shown that the leading cause of failed digital transformation projects is that we're trying to layer on new technology onto broken systems, right? If it was broken at the beginning, it is likely still going to be broken or cracked by the end. And I know a number of you are already undergoing IT modernization efforts, new ERPs, new learning management systems, updating those legacy systems. So what we want you to start to think about is, as you're thinking about the systems and the transactions, how can you now also layer on that human experience to that system? Now, I know there's an example here that's probably a little too far-fetched, but we want to think art of the possible, right? So using wearables to fundamentally change the way an employee does their job. How can technology, how can AI, how can machine learning, right, help to enhance the functions within your agencies, within HR? As you're looking at your recruitment management system, is there a way to use AI to review those applications, cutting down on your time to hire? That's where we're saying digital transformation can not only elevate you, right, but it can help you to really be a differentiator as you think about being an employer of choice. What's the pathway? How do you get there? So Glenn and I want to take this slide into a number of different ways. And we want to first start with transforming learning. So I'm going to present a challenge to you that you may have or that we know other agencies have. You're needing to digitally upskill your workforce, and an agency decides that they're going to update their LMS. But during their planning session, Janelle, to your point, there wasn't much thought about how to embed just-in-time digital training into existing systems, limiting workforce development. So our proposal back is to start to think about how AI can help you to curate a learning and development program that's tailored to this employee. Heather, we talked about skills and competencies, right? Employees coming into the workforce and wanting to grow too fast or, move to that next level, yet they haven't really developed that subject matter expertise. You can have programs at your fingertips for your employee that would allow them to develop that curriculum to close that gap and to grow. Glenn, do you want to give an example from Tennessee or maybe Colorado?
Sure. So obviously Christy is quite aware of this, but there's an agency called TennCare. It's the Medicaid Services Agency, and they're implementing largely a system or building a system ultimately to allow for both for eligibility purposes, as well as, it's both providers as well as for customers and employees to use. But more importantly, they're implementing a learning management system as part of it. And I think this is a really key part of it, because as the original system evolves, they're going to continue to add coursework to the LMS to make sure that it's up to date and that anybody, including citizens, can use it, right? And this is an innovative approach to using learning. Another example would be, is anybody here from Colorado? There's an Office of Early Education, and they've created something called Colorado Shines. And Colorado Shines is a learning management system. It's a tool that anybody can use to ultimately learn how to and become a licensed practitioner of early childhood development, right? So it's both for the practitioner as well as for the employee, as well as for the people within the actual agency that oversees this related work. And it's available to anybody and everybody within the state. So these are really innovative programs for me that show me, for instance, that we are going to use learning management systems and the tools and the content really very carefully to help both our citizens as well as our employees do their job a little bit better.
Now, does anyone have in the audience an example where you have or you're currently implementing any type of digital tools to help you from learning, from your operating model, basic core HR functions? Anything happening within your agencies or that you're seeing across the enterprise? Is there an appetite in your state? Christy?
Procurement a lot, just to help the other centralized procurement. We have centralized procurement in Tennessee, so we do that a lot. We have like these knowledge burst videos just to show people how to interact with procurement, what it is they may need. And I noticed when we were putting up our dots on here to figure out the top 10, and I saw where transforming procurement and making it more current and more user-friendly is one of the big things that I think we're all very interested in as well. But that's one way we do it. We just continually send out these knowledge burst videos to show people how to do things across the state, across the enterprise when they're working in procurement.
Sure.
Any others? Okay, so we've decided that the best way to be able to conceptualize this is to work through a few small exercises, right? So what we'd like to propose to you is if we could break out into table discussions. We have a scenario that we'd like you to consider, and then we want you brainstorming together the art of the possible here to determine a vision that you may be able to implement. What are the roadblocks? It's really important that we start to think about policy and process implementations here so that we can solve for those. And then what will it take to execute on that vision? And any other benefits or pitfalls that will be out there. Something I have to remind myself to do every day is to silence my critic here. We all know what it's like to work in state government, and we know there are going to be roadblocks, but we really do wanting you to think big here. So before I read the scenario, I'm hoping everyone's on board for a really energizing discussion at your table. And I know we have a few folks who are sitting alone at a table. If we could kind of bring those together so that we can have some robust discussions, that would be excellent. Any takers? We like each other. We're a family.
Cool.
Excellent, excellent. So the scenario that we hope you will consider, when COVID hit, there was this manager and his name was Sam. Manager level state employee, he started working from home, but the transition was certainly challenging, and we all lived that. We were there. The systems that Sam and his team work were failing to meet their basic needs. Many members of his team were struggling with technology from home, and it was difficult to transition from managing an in-person team to a remote one. Now it seems Sam's team will not be going back to the office post-COVID to save money on office space. But Sam really does start to worry about how the team will be able to meet expectations if they were to work remotely any longer. So our ask for you is to think about Sam's situation, which likely is happening in almost all of your agencies, and think about innovative ways in which you can use technology, and digital technology, to be specific here, to bridge that gap.
And this is, let me share with you, this is a real world problem. I am currently doing, as Kiana knows, doing work for the city of Boston, which was an epicenter of the pandemic at the beginning. I happened to be staying at the same hotel at the same time as the Biogen conference, and yet did not get sick. But what I wanted to share with you is that when they took off in the last minute, everybody only had desktop computers, had desktop phones, no VPN, no nothing, right? Government came to a complete standstill in one of the most progressive cities in this country for 3 months, right? So it's a real world problem that they've come out of, but yet still they're not in a position to be able to work in a high performing way, even 18 months later. So real world problem, just ask you to think about your own situation and how do we fix this?
And again, this could be near term or long term, right? How would you address this? Some tables, you may want to take this approach of how would you address it within the next year, right? Others, if you want to think big and you want to really go into the future, tell me what you think, how you would reimagine digital government of the future in 5 years and in 10 years.
So Sam's a good manager, but he probably didn't have the technology prior to COVID to meet the transition and mission, so he should evaluate that. A lot of good things out there, as we've heard the last couple days, and then help his team with new technology to communicate and set goals.
And set goals, all right? Anyone else would like to help Sam? I heard some good stuff, so...
Yeah, we were thinking along the same lines as well. What we were saying is, as far as the defining the vision, sort of what is the job of the future, and then how will it be delivered, and then what are the skills you're going to need to deliver it. And yeah, there are tons of roadblocks along the way. So we don't have a great solution, but we figure we can define it and rely on some colleagues to help us.
We had a few thoughts, and I know so many of you too went through what we all did. For working from home, what tools do they need? We had to determine how do they collaborate most effectively, and we actually switched into using Microsoft Teams, video, audio, tracking documents, and so on. But then how do they even use the tool So we stood up a SharePoint site with best practices on modes of communication, how to use the technology, videos for help so they could start right away just watching the videos and how you use the new platform. What are their barriers? Do they not have materials at home? Do they need to digitize, scan materials at work, and then they have access to that from home? Have you enabled e-signature to facilitate electronic processes? And then defining the goals, we talked a lot about what are your KPIs? Do you have dashboards? How do you know your team is productive? What type of status reporting do you have on that? Basically best practices for hybrid work. How do you stay engaged? We all kind of jumped into actually reading articles, reading books on how do you manage remotely? What is performance management? What does that look like to you in a distributed environment? That was very helpful. We just started sharing articles with each other. And some real issues around bandwidth at home. How do you deal with that? Are there cloud solutions where you're not always downloading? Some entities used VDI solutions so that you're just looking at the screen image. That helped on the bandwidth requirements. And then there's some other issues around one-time funding. With the emergency, that somewhat was freed up, but for the long term, if you're continuing to transition, you have to have enough funding for the one-time digitization to move forward. So lots of different things to think about.
We had some similar conversation around, first, short-term, looking at business processes and how can you optimize them and make them more digital. I think that's one of the things that holds us all up a little bit is we still have massive amounts of paper processes. The other thing we were talking about was metrics. How do we develop meaningful metrics for the different areas? One example, we said, maybe in procurement, it's the number of RFPs you're looking at. But if you have a very simple, straightforward RFP versus, say, a software procurement RFP, they're going to be very different amounts of time to deal with that. So you have to figure out how to develop something that's meaningful. You also have to train your managers to be able to interpret the metrics and manage to them and come up with ideas to improve them, as well as developing dashboards so that the managers can look at them, the employees can look at them, so that they have an understanding of where they are.
I love that transparency. Glenn, they checked their Cynic.
All right, so let's do discussion number 2. You got that? Thanks. So this is more specific to HR and HR processes. And I'd like for you all to think a little bit about how you would reimagine some of these core processes. Depending on who you work for, it's like commercial is 9 processes and 23 sub-processes. As a federal government employee, it was 10 processes and 45 sub-processes. And state government is usually somewhere in between, right? And these are highly manual, paper-laden processes. So I'd really like you to think a little bit about how you change recruiting and hiring, including the sourcing of candidates, right? Because it's going to be even that much more important about how you find these people. The days of post and pray are over, right? Right? Especially in a highly competitive environment. Let's think about onboarding. I mean, as a Fed, so I'm going to go back to recruiting and hiring for a minute. As a Fed, this is my example. We had an OPM put out an 80-day target. It took us 180 to 200 days to bring in people, right, on the post and pray matter. On onboarding, right, as a new employee, I did my fingerprints in one place. I got my picture and badge in another place. I went to HR to sign up for all my policies and practices. I went to facilities to find my desk. I went to IT to get my computer. You can't do that anymore, right, in this environment, right? And that was a whole day, if not 2 days. And even as a senior executive, I went, this is how you treat me. What do you do with GS7s, right? Let's look at learning and professional development. We all know, right, what's the first thing to go in a budget cut, right? Training, right? And we wonder sometimes why IT professionals don't know more about IT, right? They don't go to conferences. They don't subscribe to publications. They don't belong to professional associations because we don't pay for them anymore. Right? So this is how things have changed. And then performance management. Oh, I don't know about you. I got evaluated supposedly twice a year, but we used the same form and we did it all at the end, right? Here are my goals and objectives, fill out the form. You know, I either met them or didn't meet them, right? That was the end of the day, right? It wasn't real-time performance management. So I'm sure I'm not saying anything that you haven't already experienced here, but it's broken, right? And it's particularly broken now in this kind of hybrid work environment or remote work environment. So what are you going to do? Got any ideas? How are you going to use digital government to ultimately help this and improve the HR function so it's much more responsive to the agencies and departments that it has to serve? That's your challenge.
You don't have to solve for them all, just one.
Pick one.
And we'll have about about 6 minutes to chat here, and then we'll do our another quick readout. And we know this all too well, technology isn't going to solve the problem. Technology is only going to enable you to solve that problem. But what we are hearing at each table is great strategy on maybe some functions that didn't exist or were broken, and how you can start to address those, Glenn. So I'm going to let you, I heard some good stuff, so I need you to get in on this.
I think we need to talk to Janelle again for a minute on this too. I think she's got a really great point of view about business ownership. So,
Which particular point about business ownership? My benefits and personnel, or the IT one?
take your pick. I like them both.
So again, we've talked a lot, especially in this with my team here, and Glenn, around business ownership. And I think for us, some of our challenges is that, well, one, Shiloh oversees benefits. Her team really understands benefits, and they perceive themselves as experts. They come to the conversation with the IT professionals and or system integrators with a different posture and a different ability to then understand how the technology can be leveraged to enhance their processes. My personnel side of the house struggles a bit on that. And so when we think about helping to, whether it's recruiting and hiring, onboarding, learning management, we don't necessarily come to the conversation with that same level of expertise or confidence in how to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. And without having the right crosswalk or translator helping us, there's a technical divide. And then that leads to, from my perspective, less ideal outputs, right? So our system ends up not being what we really want it to be. And we just really struggle on getting some of these key parts right, especially at the beginning of the process.
Great. Perfect, thank you. So, I mean, I think there is a common theme here across the tables, which are your processes are probably haven't been looked at in your HR processes for probably a very long time. They're probably very paper-laden and manual in nature to begin with. And sometimes you're trying to think about technology as a way of actually replicating that manual and paper-laden process, and you shouldn't, right? The bottom line to all of this is that let's think about what this process should really look like in order to get to the outcome that we want. Right, and let's see if we can streamline it and standardize it, and then figure out what the tool is that we're going to leverage for that purpose across the board here, right? And then what kind of other things do we add to that tool to ultimately enhance it or accelerate the actual activity? You know, so is it you know, you've got to, do you automate your workflow at that particular stage? That's as an example. Do you add artificial intelligence even to the recruiting and hiring process so that you actually get the better candidate through it? And you know, do you just change your job descriptions so that you reduce the number of requirements so more people get through the process, and then you actually do a greater job or more careful job of screening them in the second or third round? So ultimately, lots of various solutions here, but it all comes back to the business ownership of the process.
Well, I think we're at time now, unless anyone else has anything they'd like to share from their most recent breakout. Taking a pause and a look around. All right, well, thank you all for having us and for your time today.
Thanks.